Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to talk to Dr. Dion Pamela Joseph, better known as Dr. P in her neck of the world, which is London, England. And I'm in Dallas, of course, Dallas, Texas. And Rick McCarthy's with us this morning. Rick's an LMFT in California, and he's up bright and early. Dr. Dion Pamela Joseph is an interesting character. I first ran across her probably a year ago now. She showed up in my X feed, and I follow the smart kids. So I hit the follow button, and I've read every post she's done since then, and I've liked and replied most of them. She's a sharp cookie, and that's why we reached across the pond at the risk of international time zones and the angst that can bring, and here we are. She has a BA with honors, of course, in various clinical psychology disciplines, which I don't understand what they mean. What is a D-Clin Psych and a C-Psych?
Yeah, the Doctor of Clinical Psychology and C-Psych is Chartered Psychologist. However, I don't know how much longer the latter will last because I'm under professional investigation for my tweets.
Oh, you are?
I've been
Oh my
reported
gosh.
for writing
And she's
tweets that are harmful to
She's
trans.
also a certified expert witness, a certified autism assessor. She's a clinical psychologist, been practicing for 30 years, both in the UK and Middle East, and her work has been mainly with children and families. She's a certified expert witness who has extensive experience in giving evidence in family courts. She's also a certified autism assessor, as I mentioned. She believes that transgenderism is a mental illness directly comparable to any other form of psychotic delusion. She's particularly critical of the concept of gender dysphoria, describing it as a wholly false construct that has no empirical or evidentiary basis. She also believes gender ideology is a generational disaster, and she asserts that gender affirming care is a crime against humanity. And frankly, I wholeheartedly agree with every bit of that. Now, you are very consistent in your posts. In fact, my analysis, my Grok-based analysis, says that she holds an unequivocal and consistently stated position that gender dysphoria is false. Her view is not nuanced or evolving.
That's wrong way of putting it.
I love that. Not nuanced or evolving. It is absolute and rooted in her professional experience. So you're nothing if not consistent, Dr. P. So good morning and glad you're here with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip.
You consistently state that gender dysphoria does not exist. So let's jump in the deep end of the pool and make your case. Why is that?
Okay, so the first reason why I say it does not exist is that it does not have an empirical basis. It was not created from research and observation and clinical testing. As far as I'm aware, it was literally a committee sat down and created it out of the old gender identity disorder. So it has no basis in reality. So that's the first thing. And the second, and as psychologists, we are able to, we were always taught that we are scientists, practitioners. We're not just pulling things out of thin air. Whatever we do has to be based, has to have a very sound empirical basis. You can literally go and measure it and record it, and you can see the data where they came up with this concept. There's nothing like that exists for gender dysphoria. It's an entirely self-reported commission, and also we can't measure it. There's no standardized measure for it. We don't know how severe it is. We don't know when it is relieved. We don't know if it presents differently in children or adults. It's just made up.
Sounds a lot like the state of psychiatry. We don't know what's going on and we can't prove it, but here's a pill.
Very much. But at least with clinical psychology, what separates us from other talking therapists is that we are able to measure everything. Psychometrics, being trained in psychometrics is a fundamental part of our clinical skill set. Psycho is the mind and metrics is measuring. So I can measure, as a psychologist, we can measure just about everything. As I said in my article, we get every 6 months, they produce these huge, great catalogue of tests, and you can measure almost any part of the human condition. And depending on the complexity of what you're measuring, you have to have certain qualification levels to be able to measure certain things. So say, for example, if I wanted to just test your anxiety levels here, Rick, I'd give you something like the Beck Anxiety Inventory, which is, a questionnaire. Quick questionnaire, I could score it. If I wanted to measure your IQ, if I wanted to measure perhaps to see whether you were beginning to develop dementia, I would have to have a test that I could only buy if I've got a doctoral degree here in the UK. You have to put in your QL code. Yeah. So we can measure everything. But gender dysphoria, just this new kid on the block, just comes along and the person just says, I feel unhappy with my body, and the therapist gives a false diagnosis of gender dysphoria. It does not exist. It is a false construct.
But it's in the DSM and it's on the internet, so it must be real.
Indeed, indeed. Well, this is it. And you know what? What I realize now is part of my clinical training, we were taught, I could sort of see why we got into this problem. We were taught that if it was in the DSM, it was real. It just was there. And I'm looking, I mean, it was over 30 years ago, but I don't ever remember being taught in any of my lectures, how does something get into the DSM? Who decides what's in and what's out? It's just there. And this is literally taken as gospel because they've got a nice name, and when you see the printed copy of it, it's very, very important looking with gold lettering on it, and everyone just takes it as gospel, as something real. But it's not. Gender dysphoria just sort of slipped its way into the DSM, and I call it the biggest medical hoax in human history. The so-called diagnosis of gender dysphoria. It is a fraud. It is not real.
I read some things. Your critics claim that your failure to base your views on caseload metrics or peer-reviewed studies or clinical trials, somehow that undermines your logic.
Well, my logic is that if somebody thinks they're in the wrong body, it is obviously a dysfunction of their mind. It is a mental illness. And the thing about gender dysphoria, it is based on the concept of gender. So we have to accept that somebody has a gender identity. And how do we prove that? It is a metaphysical concept, a religious concept that should not have escaped the seminar room on a Friday afternoon with your professor, small group seminar. Let's discuss this. Somehow it escaped into the wild. What should have literally just been a theoretical concept for some bored undergraduates to go away and write an essay on. I remember my Friday afternoon lectures. That's what it should have been. It's not real, and how it got into the public consciousness and people accept it as reality is shocking. And when I say I think I've written a paper, one of my later papers, I'm not saying that people who think they've got gender dysphoria are not feeling something. They are. They're feeling something that might be quite real to them, but I place all of the constructs and feelings that go into gender dysphoria, I place those in the family of anxiety disorders. It is an anxiety disorder where the focus of the anxiety is your body part and perhaps your social functioning. That's all it is. And as psychologists, we know how to treat anxiety disorders very, very easily, relatively easily, unless it's something complex like OCD or something. But we know how to treat this.
Dion, how would, apart from the recent fad of gender dysphoria over the last 10 years or so, how would you account for entering the DSM and being noted 3-4 decades ago? What about those people? Even
As I
though
said,
they were
yeah,
quite rare.
yes. In my 30 years of practice, I had one referral, just one single referral that mentioned gender. And I sat down and I calculated, the NHS, we have lots of meetings, referral meetings, clinical meetings, case study. I think I sat through about 4,000 meetings in 30 years. And I had one referral for gender. And that was when I was living in the Middle East. And it was a little Palestinian boy who I now realize probably had the same DSD that Iman and Khalif has, because it's quite a common genetic problem in that population.
The
So to
Olympic
answer
boxer.
your, sorry?
The Olympic boxer you're referring to.
Yes. That's
Yeah.
the only time in 30 years the word gender was ever mentioned to me as a clinician working with children and families across in the UK. We're trained to work across the age range, and it was just that one time, and it wasn't in the NHS. When I look at the referral list I used to get on a Friday afternoon, I'd say about a quarter of those referrals were for gender issues. And what we used to get were things like anorexia, self-harming, school refusal, cutting, bedtime problems, eating, they're all gone. We've cured all of that, cured in inverted commas. We've cured anorexia and young girls. Wonderful, we cured it. Because they all think they're boys now. They're not cutting anymore. They all think they're boys.
Yeah, I remember when I first got into this field, eating disorder was fresh on the scene, and that was around for a good 10 years, and then self-harm came in.
That's right.
And so we had to get, study up on self-harm.
Yeah.
And mostly female,
Yes.
and then
Yep.
that
Yeah,
faded
teenagers.
out.
I can't remember the last time I've seen a referral that mentions either of those two clinical conditions.
Yes.
So all of this stuff you're discussing is just simply the manifestation du jour of an underlying problem.
Yeah.
It's being dressed up
It's
as something new every 10, 15, 20 years.
it's something that got into the symptom pool. And to answer your question, Rick, I think it came through the ability to make money. The Denton's document, it seemed to be a systematic, concerted effort to push this onto people, wasn't there?
Could you address, which I really appreciated in your writings, as you talk about language and perception, how it changes perception, especially as you refer to gender.
Yes, I wrote a paper about that because I think the word trans woman is one of the most dangerous words in the English language that's ever been, quite frankly, where this is going. I always and I made a New Year's resolution. I certainly, I have my convictions. I made a New Year's resolution at the beginning of, I think it was 2025, never to write that word out in full. And I'm only saying it now because you've asked me about it, because whenever we say a word, it shapes our brains. It's like Pavlovian dogs, and new neural connections are being made. We are conditioning ourselves into thinking, even at a subconscious level, that something called a trans woman exists in nature and a man can become a woman, right? So I think language is hugely important, which is also why I'm always exhorting people not to use the term gender dysphoria, because as I've just said, it's not a real concept. And my preferred alternative is either transgender ideations or harmful transgender ideations. There's another person in the UK, we came up with this terminology almost simultaneously. Mine was HTIs, I call them. He calls them transgender ideations. So that we are not accepting the concept that gender dysphoria is a real thing, but we are acknowledging that these people think they're trans and they're feeling something. We are rejecting the appalling definition that the DSM-5 gave. And if you reduce or if you convert gender dysphoria into transgender ideations, then in the name of it, it gives you a way of how to treat it. We can help shift these persons' ideations through cognitive therapy, cognitive restructuring. If you say gender dysphoria, well, dysphoria just means low mood anyway, so most people don't actually know that. But if you say something like gender dysphoria, it sounds big and it sounds huge and it sounds real. We need to deconstruct it. So language is really, really important. And I just say, please don't use gender dysphoria. Don't say children with gender, because every time they hear it, they think they've got it. And
Mhm.
Well,
children
yeah,
with gender
as you
dysphoria.
mentioned that, when I think of, I have to really rack my brain to think of maybe two kids that you have one, maybe two that I recall that had some issue with thinking about themselves in the context of the opposite sex. And I didn't even look at the DSM. I didn't think of gender dysphoria. I just thought, okay, they're confused, and that wasn't the only confusion they had, because
Yeah.
they were teenagers. So that was one of many, and we worked it through. And I I didn't write up any treatment plan. We just dealt with it,
Well, how long
and they
ago was
dealt with
this,
it.
Rick?
What's this?
How long ago did this happen? Did you get these referrals?
Probably one was in the 80s, maybe
Mm-hmm.
the other in the 90s.
Yeah. But you didn't accept it. The therapeutic, your colleagues didn't say, yeah, this person has gender dysphoria, we'll
No,
accept it, did they?
I didn't even think of it in those terms.
Exactly. Years ago, I was working in a team, and we had two little African children had come in. Their mother had died. They were about 7 or maybe 5 or 6, maybe a bit older, and they were convinced they were seeing the ghost of their mother. And everybody in the therapeutic team said, no, 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 these children are not seeing their mother's ghost. They're trying to process her death. So there was no sort of blanket acceptance that they were seeing her ghost. But this is what we're doing with gender dysphoria. We're not saying, well, what else has gone on in this child's life?
Right.
What adverse childhood events? Have they had a bereavement? Have they this? And we've lost our professional curiosity. And I think what is so dangerous about this diagnosis is that we are trained to question. We've just thrown away everything we know about the human condition and what drives people. And now very rigorous training. It's just all gone out the window.
Before we move on to
Mhm.
some of the basic tenets of your material,
Okay.
explain something to me because I don't know the answer to this. And Rick, you can jump in there too. In a court of law, a plaintiff or the state brings a charge against someone and the defendant shows up in court. Well, the state has to prove their case. The defendant can just sit there and say nothing. The burden of proof is on the guy that brings the complaint or the claim. How does it work in the world of psychology? Does someone make a claim? I'm going to set this up and then knock it down and let you respond. Does someone make a claim and then have to prove it? Or do you try and counter a claim and then the burden of proof is on you to counter the claim? Or is that bias going in both directions and you don't make claims and prove or disprove? You just run tests and observe the outcomes?
Well, I think it depends what they're claiming. It depends what they're claiming. But as a clinical psychologist, you always have to be open and accepting to a certain degree of what somebody is saying, but not if it's going to harm them. So you will listen to them. And my training now, if somebody says, I've got X, Y, or Z, is to do a proper assessment. This is going back to my earlier conversation. I will use standardized tools to assess them. I would take a proper clinical history, a systemic assessment. One of my very, very first posts, which has got lost in the midst of time, would be what it would look like, what it should look like if a child comes in and says, I'm in the wrong body, right? And if you are doing a proper assessment, it should take about 18 months because you assess the child, you assess the parents separately, you assess the family system, you assess the immediate family system, then you assess the broader system, then you assess them in the school setting. And then when you put all this information together from a multidisciplinary team, then you come up with a diagnosis of I'm in the wrong body. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. It is a
But
collaborative process. This is
I'm
the problem. It's
curious.
collaborative. It should
See,
be. And what's happened now is it's all going in one direction.
where and when were you trained? The
Okay,
reason I asked that, what you just got through saying would confuse most people in graduate school today. They wouldn't know what
really?
you were talking about. Yes.
Which part of it would they not know?
The entire part of the assessment
Really? Okay.
Absolutely.
and the curiosity part as well.
Okay, well, to answer your question, I was trained, the NHS, clinical psychologists in the UK are trained through the NHS. So we are trained by the NHS. And I was trained 30 years ago as part of a regional
Okay.
NHS scheme here in the southeast of England. I got my degree through the University of Canterbury, but they just sort of awarded the degree. I only ever went there on the day to get my doctoral certificate. But the training was done in the NHS on the ground over 3 years in different parts of the NHS. That's how we were trained. And then during our training, we'd have blocks of teaching, a 6-month block on each part of the human lifespan. And for that 6-month block, we would have how it worked. We had a 2-week residential placement. We'd residential settings. We'd go off to the countryside and study for 2 weeks. And then so we were doing a children and families training. That would last for 6 months. So for 3 days, we would be in the NHS working. And for 2 days, we would be in the classroom for each block we did, of starting from children and families right up to older adults.
Would you say that the training 30 years ago in the UK was fairly uniform across the board?
Yes, it pretty much was, yeah. Because it was all run through the NHS,
And
which is what you guys don't have there. We have this centralized system where, it's all rolled out in a central way.
so I'm wondering if that's part of what you found, that framework that again you just stated in terms of how you approach a client in a diagnosis or an assessment, that that has changed, and I'm sure in the UK as well, certainly here in the United States. Did that lay the groundwork, I suppose, for the ability for gender dysphoria to come on board, as opposed to, eating disorders or self-harm? People were actually doing that. In other words, the symptoms were there and the
Hmm.
diagnoses were mutually accepted. But now, as you said, because of language and probably the culture, that just got thrown in the mix and people accepted it.
Well, this is what really annoys me. First off, some of the people who trained me are now very high up in the BPS. So they trained me in the model that I've got, but they're not saying anything. They know who they are.
Yeah.
They may be watching. They know who they are. And
And they're
they are the
keeping
sort
their
of
mouth shut?
elders. Sorry?
They're keeping their mouth
They're
closed
keeping their
because
mouths shut. They
why?
know who they are. And you know what? I get quite a few clinical psychologists, not those people. Clinical psychologists will DM me on Twitter and say, Dr. P, please keep speaking. You are saying the
Good.
truth. We can't say anything in our departments. Please don't stop. Which is why I've got myself into this mess, because I just could not stay silent. I just could not. I just felt a moral imperative to speak out, because I know wrong when I see it.
Well, good for you.
Thank you.
Gender dysphoria. I got two major tenets out of all my reading. We're getting ready for this. Number one is
Okay.
gender dysphoria is and should be treated as TIS, trans ideation syndrome. So unpack that one for me. What's the difference in the two? What is it? What's the difference?
Okay, as I said, it's the harmful transgender ideations. People are feeling something. People are feeling distress, especially a lot of the youngsters coming into it who have probably experienced childhood sexual abuse, adverse childhood events. They are feeling something, but we take gender off the table. We just don't mention that word. The minute you walk into the room and the word gender is mentioned, no, we're not talking about that. Let's talk about what is driving these feelings. What are the automatic thoughts? What is the cognitive schema that has made you think you are in the wrong body? What is going on for you? And any therapist, this is what the therapist should be doing. They should be asking questions. When we were being taught, we was like the downward arrow technique, to just keep asking, and then, what next? And then. And we get to the underlying, what's driving these dysfunctional ideations. And you could fit this within a CBT framework. The person is just caught in the grip of very powerful cognitive distortions. The problem is we're living in a transgenic environment. When they walk out your office, they're going to see a pride flag. They're going to see this. The whole environment is reinforcing their cognitive distortions. That is the problem. That is the problem. It's not that difficult to treat, especially with youngsters. Yeah, who haven't had time to have these ideas embedded in their brains for too long. It could be properly, quite quickly and easily treated. But every adult in their life, in their school, is reinforcing their cognitive distortions instead of challenging them and teaching them how to challenge and to understand and to recognize the errors in their thinking. The bottom line is we are human beings. We are male and female. So even if somebody feels they're in the wrong body, they're not. They've only got the one body. So you have to reconcile. They can't go to, I don't know, IKEA and pick up another body. So whatever you do has to be based in reality. You've got the one body. Learn to live in it. It's not difficult.
And on top of that, Philip and I grew up in an era where if I decided for whatever reason when I was 5 or 6 to put on my big sister's dress, my dad would say, "You're not a girl, take it off."
Yeah, yeah.
And that would be the end of the story.
Same. Yeah, we're all the same age.
No years of counseling or transitioning or anything. It just, you're not a
Children
girl.
need boundaries, they need containment, and they need adults to be
Right.
adults. Do you know, I'm not actually surprised that we're in this mess, because I used to work in a child development clinic, and I remember youngsters coming in who would not eat. They didn't have bedtimes. They wouldn't sit at the table to eat. They were out of control. And the parents just didn't know what to do with them. And this whole guff, I'm going to say, absolute nonsense about child-centered parenting has partly got us where we are today, because all those little monstrous kids have grown up now, and they're all teachers, and they're in the same kids I saw 30 years ago who would not go to bed and eat their dinners, and now, working as therapists and teachers, and they're letting kids run amok.
They're adult monsters now.
They're adult monsters now, yeah.
Listening to all of this, because if you haven't figured out, I am not a licensed counselor. Okay, I'm not. But listening to this as Joe Citizen, the exasperation that comes out of this conversation. It's like, how in the world could grown, cognizant, clear-headed thinking people not only allow this to happen,
Yeah.
that's the group that shouldn't have allowed it to happen, but how could another group of adults push this stuff? It's not medically based, not science-based. You can't measure it.
Yeah.
You can't touch it. And the only answer that makes any sense is that there's something outside of the scope of medicine and psychology that is guiding and directing this, a political agenda. And I know the answer to all this stuff. It's just frustrating to even think about it. If we could just get the political ideology that's driving this off the table, then we could let the sane kids go back to work and clean up the mess. Speaking of messes, before I move on to tenet number
Yeah.
2, in the state of Texas, I'll speak to that since I know the numbers. There's 94,000 licensed counselors, therapists, social workers, MFTs, LPCs, so forth, and psychologists. And probably 80% of them are captured by this whole woke ideology thing, and they're just running full speed with this gender affirming care thing. How do we fix that short term? Any thoughts?
It's got to come from the top, isn't it? It's got to, do you know what? People keep asking me, especially as a woman, why are people following that? As you just said, why do we follow this? And I think if we look at the behavior of a counselor who's pushing this as an individual, it doesn't make sense. It's not rational. If we look at this behavior from a group, it is very rational. It is survival behavior. And I take what is happening now right back to evolutionary biology, right? We are now behaving as if we are in groups of maybe 30 or 40 on the plains of Africa 300,000 years ago. And if you don't conform to the group, you are going to be pushed out to be predated on. And that's what's happening. So from an individual point of view, it's not rational. It's not rational for me to be sitting here in front of you because I'm now being hauled up in front of the rational thing for me to do was to be quiet and to say nothing. So it's what I think as a feminist, this really annoys me, but I think it's true. It needs the head man of the group. The chieftain of the group is going to have to say, this is wrong. I think when President Trump came in, he was doing that to some degree, but it's going to take people in authority, and I'm sorry to say, it's going to take males in authority because men attend to other men. This again is encoded into our evolution. The women stayed behind and did, the childcare. The men went off on hunting trips, and they, this was happening over millions and millions of years of various, iterations of hominids. So men attend to other men. It's the men of the tribe who are going to have to step up and say this is wrong. So to answer your question, it's going to take a powerful male in authority to say no, and then I think it's going to trickle down from there.
Yeah.
And this is why women are so captured. We are so dependent on others for our survival. And this is why middle-aged, women of a certain age, young girls, I think, I tied this directly into evolutionary biology. This is why young girls fall for this. Because young girls had to get resources from the tribe, And to get your resources, you align to the powerful men in the tribe. And if the powerful men in the tribe are telling you men can become women, then you will go along with that. I think it's also one of the reasons why most TERFs are older women past reproductive age, because we know what's what. We don't need those resources so much, and we can speak out.
So given
So it's the young
everything you
girls who've
just
got
said,
everything to gain, and the older women who've got nothing to lose. I think we have to look at this in the terms of human, not individuals, but humans acting as groups of people, in terms of evolution, how this is shaping our behavior now. Then it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Dion, given
Rick, I don't know what I did, but I fired up the feminist, didn't I? Go ahead. Go ahead, Rick.
given what you just said, what would someone like myself, given what you described about the importance and the influence of language, if I cross paths with a colleague that looks at gender dysphoria as real as the sun in the sky, what language can I use to take that first step in helping that individual start to maybe open up some of that curiosity again that, well, maybe I got something wrong here, or I'm not exactly sure.
Well,
Is
I
there
think it goes back to what I said, and especially if they're a clinician, is like what is driving this? What's driving this distress in this person? I learned very early on not to say that it's not necessarily gender dysphoria is not real. To acknowledge the feelings, but to try and explore what might be driving those feelings. That would be my therapeutic way in. Luckily, I haven't actually, because I work privately, I haven't actually met a true believer. But you know what,
Oh,
Rick?
yeah.
Deep down, nobody believes this. Nobody.
right? Right. I
We
think
are
you're probably
all
right.
males and we're all females. I don't think anyone really, really, really believes this.
So
Not
it's
deep
fear.
down. Yes. Going back to, am I going to get chucked out the tribe to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger? No, I'll say men are women, and I'll say Leah Thomas is a woman, no one believes this. I don't think anybody really, really, even particularly the transvestite men who are pushing it. This is why they're pushing it so hard, you know.
Hmm.
No, I don't think anyone really believes this. The youngsters are into it because it seems exciting. They think they've discovered something new. I have a friend whose daughter is so rabidly into this, so rabidly. She's about 23 and she needed a medical procedure the other day. And she asked her mum on the quiet. She didn't want every friend to know, could she see a female doctor? And this was a young girl who trans women are women, but she asked her mum on the quiet, "Mum, I need to see a female." You know,
She wanted to see a woman without a penis.
she wanted to see a real woman. She didn't want to see a
Yeah.
Yeah.
transvestite.
Back to what I asked you a minute ago about how do we fix this? I think in the short term, we can fix the infrastructure, meaning in the state of Texas, for example, and there are other states, and the momentum is picking up. Texas has 99% outlawed gender affirming care.
Yeah.
There's one or two little soft spots
Okay.
in the law that they like to poke and hope that's their loophole, but it's not. But just outlawing something, outlawing bank robbery doesn't mean that the bank robbers aren't going to still try. So we can fix the infrastructure short term.
Yeah.
The bigger problem is those 90,000 licensees that are captured. How do you fix somebody's thinking? And to Rick's question, it made
Uh-huh.
me wonder, is there a perfectly engaging opening statement to get someone's open-minded attention, or is perhaps a Socratic method, ask them questions and let them hang themselves with the answers or stutter? And all of that's a nice academic thought to
Yeah.
to to entertain, but unfortunately, I think at the end of the day, 90% of those people that are captured, they're not reachable. That's Debbie Downer stuff, but I just don't think you can reach most of them. They are just perfectly ensconced in their way of thinking, and they've been trained that, you know what, somebody's going to come along and try and convince you you're wrong. And then when they see you in the wild, there's what the professor was talking about, and they're not going to listen to you. So I don't know that we can fix the people portion of the problem short term. The long term is just to fix short term. We fix academia so they quit cranking out the adherents, the new political activists. We have licensed political activists now, not licensed
Yeah.
counselors.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when academia quits cranking that out, and that's in the works, then we can start replacing what we have now. And hopefully the public will wake up, and they're already doing it. They're looking for, my term, a non-woke counselor to
Yes.
talk
Yes.
to.
Yes. Yes. People ask me if
I
I'm
get
good.
phone calls, who do you
Yeah.
know that this, and who do you know that? So people are looking, and hopefully the public will be one of the bulwarks that this evil way of thinking runs up against. All right, second guideline that I got out of your reading is that gender affirming care is repackaged CTA, childhood
Yes.
transition
Absolutely.
abuse. And CTA is related to CSA. Why don't you unpack that for me? What's the relationship between childhood sexual abuse and CTA?
Okay, so as I call it, childhood sexual abuse is about an imbalance of power, isn't it? It's about doing something to a child's body that they're not able to consent to. And whether that is having illegal sexual relations with that child or cutting that child's breast off, it's within the same family of I am the adult doing something to this child who has not got the neurobiological or the social skills or whatever, the maturity, let's just say maturity to consent. No child can consent. In fact, I don't think anyone can consent to gender affirming care because no one knows what it's adult or child. I would ban all of it across the board for everybody of any age. But children are particularly vulnerable because their brains aren't formed yet. How can you get a child whose neural connections and synaptogenesis, the architecture of their brain is not complete until you're about 30. It's not 25, it's 30. And how can you then say to this child, I'm going to do this to you, or that you have the capacity to consent? Nobody has the capacity to consent to the gender affirming care. But I think I wrote that paper because I wanted to draw those parallels about about the power imbalance that's going on with children who are being transitioned. And I think I identified primary, secondary, and tertiary childhood transition abuse to differentiate between someone getting actual physical surgery to seeing just a pride flag outside of school. That's tertiary. So you go from the primary to the tertiary. Yeah. And what I want to do as a clinical psychologist is to use my training to try and to put some conceptual frameworks around this. So when people are thinking about this and saying, well, this is really wrong, we shouldn't be cutting off a 12-year-old girl's breast. And I can say, look, yeah, I've come up with this formulation. This is my idea about how we can look at this within a clinical framework. But yes, it is abuse. It is completely abuse.
Yes, it is. I don't know how it works across the pond in your part of the world, but in Texas and many other states, again, a child cannot consent. It's not legal. It's not legal for a child to consent to a medical procedure. It's not legal for his parents or her parents to consent to a surgery or medical procedure on a child if the procedure results in their inability to have kids in the future. That's a Supreme Court thing, been a thing for years and years and years. So the kid cannot have this surgery legally in the United States, happening anyway still, unfortunately, in places.
Yeah.
But if anybody ever takes these people to court, they would win, assuming they didn't get a liberal judge. Anyway, the idea, I like the way you did this and packaged it, that gender affirming care, which is presented as we're loving, we're affirming, we're going to pat you on the popo and say it's going to be okay. We believe you. You get to self-affirm or self-diagnose. And we're going to say, okay, that's what gender affirming care is in order to achieve whatever political agenda is on trying to take place. But you're saying, and it's obvious, and I agree, that gender affirming care is nothing more than CSA, childhood sexual abuse, which you have framed and colored as CTA, childhood transition abuse. And it's 3 levels, which you just mentioned, the primary, secondary, and tertiary, and what that involves. It's a different way of looking at something. It's a different way of looking at the same thing. Gender affirming care is an evil approach to what amounts to sexual abuse.
Yeah, I call it the daylight twin. I call gender affirming care the daylight twin of child sexual abuse, which is the dark twin. They're twins. One is just being happening out in the open. And I've lost my train of thought there.
No, that's where I was going. That actually was your dark twin and daylight twin concept, 2 sides of the same coin. And I like that.
What I was going to say is that the pictures of trans children, just how we treat pictures of an unclothed child or child engaged in sexual activity. We call this childhood sexual abuse material. I wrote that article because I wanted to shift people's perceptions of what was going on. And I've now started saying to people on Twitter, look, if you're going to show a trans child, blur their face out, because this is a child transition abuse. This is C-Town, I call it. Child transition abuse material. This is abuse material. It's not a little child who's found out that they're a boy and they're happy, or a girl. This is an abuse image. And if you're not going to show the picture of this child naked, don't show this picture of this same child as the opposite sex. Because what you've done, you've locked this child into their most stupid, irrational, worst teenage decision that they're going to have to see for the rest of their lives. They're going to have to see pictures of themselves at their very worst when they were being let down by every single adult in their life. Those pictures are there forever. They are abuse images. And the papers, they gleefully show this celebrity, that celebrity. And I say, no, this is an abuse image. Blur their face out. And I'm hoping, it's just one account on Twitter, I'm just hoping it's going to start even just letting a little bit of chink of light in to the editors of people like the Daily Mail and stuff who love doing this, just to
So
get people to
you're
think about
attempting
what they're seeing. Mm-hmm.
you're attempting to retrain, change the language perception and framework, I suppose, of what they're doing, what they've created, to
I
challenge
am.
that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm about to publish a new paper this weekend if my husband just does the, which is really going to set the cat amongst the pigeons, because I'm saying that anybody who is in receipt of hormonal gender affirming care should not be in employment. They are not safe to be in the workplace. Yeah. Because of the
100% agree.
neurobiological damage. Their
Yes.
brains are getting atrophied, their grey matter is shrinking away, their ventricles are swelling up, they're getting inflammation. And it's not a matter of rights. And are you familiar with the concept of the invisible gorilla, Rick? When they did the
Invisible gorilla?
experiment, the invisible gorilla, when they had the experiment where people had to look at how many passes were being passed between a basketball team, and the gorilla came onto the screen, banged its chest for 9 seconds, then walked off. And about 40% people didn't notice the gorilla because they were so busy counting passes
Oh,
between the
yes.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is why I'm calling it the invisible gorilla of gender ideology. We have been so busy thinking about people's rights, we haven't talked about the risks. And I'm framing it
Yeah.
very much within a neurobiological framework. It's not, whatever, trans, where you can have your identity, you can identify whatever you like. But I don't want to get on a plane flown by a pilot whose brain has been affected by estrogen, by gender affirming care, because I don't know what's happening to that brain. And this is the
Yes.
paper I'm about to publish. It's a public health.
When I read yesterday that you were working on that article, I don't remember where I saw it, but
Yeah.
that you were working on that article, my very first thought was, wow, that would be the school shootings that happen over here. They all seem to be, I mean, you can go back a number of years, but at least every school shooting for the last 2 years has been somebody that's hopped up on these
Yeah.
cross-sex
And
hormones.
there's just been another one in Turkey who was non-binary, so we don't know if that person. And the thing is, Philip, it's not just the school shootings. I'm calling it the invisible harms that we don't know. How
Mhm.
many extra accidents have there? How many cancers have been missed? How many road accidents? How many extra accidents have there? We don't need to wait for a spectacular like a school shooting or a plane to come down. We don't know the harms. It's like Donald Rumsfeld, the unknown unknowns. We know this is causing brain damage, but we don't know what it's doing to people in the workplace. Yeah.
So, how is your stuff being? We're going to wrap this up because you've got a
Yeah.
gym date to get to.
Yes, I have.
What you're doing, how is it being received? Are you getting any traction from anybody on your side of the world besides guys like me wanting to talk to you?
We have got I have to now have a Ring doorbell. The police came round and gave me a Ring doorbell. I've got to get a personal alarm. And because I've had death threats, I've had people threatening my address published. So I'm now on, if I ring 999, the police will come straight to my house. That's how it's been received.
By the other side.
Yeah.
Are you any positive feedback other than occasional DM saying don't quit?
I don't know, because I think I'm just saying the same thing over and over again. And to be honest, I don't know. I don't know what impact it's having. I don't know
Well,
if I'm shifting the
I
needle.
can tell you, you're having an extremely positive impact just by doing nothing but watching your Twitter feed, your X feed. It's like, okay, this is one of those leaders you were talking about. And I think it's going to take both the male and the female, because the females have spent the last 40 years beating up the males, and the males are cowering. And so what it's going to take to fix that is the other females shouting down the loudmouth females, and they can
Yeah.
fix each other. Then the men can lead the whole mess.
Well, yes. I mean, can I just correct what I just said? Because I know we're called Turf Island because of people, there's some major turfs over here. And I'm not denigrating them. I was just there yesterday outside the Houses of Parliament with them. What we older women have been doing has been phenomenal here. We're so proud to be Turf Island, but it's going to take people like our awful Prime Minister, Keir, and where's streeting? It's going to take the men. I'm sorry to say it, but this is human nature. This is how human societies everywhere are organized. It's going to take top men to. And on that note, I would love Elon Musk to follow me or retweet one of my articles, but he hasn't yet, for reasons which
Oh,
I shall keep to myself.
Well,
But he's
Dion,
not done that.
you've certainly encouraged me, and I certainly encourage your continued courage in this,
Thank you.
because it sounds like they're turning up the heat, and your voice is extremely valuable. So I
Yeah, please don't
sure
stop.
hope you continue.
I just think, oh God, it's me banging on again. How many times can I tweet the same things? How
No,
many
no.
times can I keep saying the same things, you know?
You keep doing what you over and over and over again. Kathleen and I were talking about that very point just yesterday. She was conducting a class and she was repeating something she'd done a million times. And my first response was, "You've done that before. Let's move on." And then I caught myself and said, "No, they need to hear it 100 times, just exactly the same way. You keep doing what you're doing because
Thank you.
yeah, you keep doing what you're doing. There's people watching and following, and I wish more people would just, it takes one person to put their head up
Mm,
and say something, and the rest will follow slowly. But yeah, you're there. Don't give up.
thank you. Thank you, Philip. Thank
All
you.
right.
I mean,
Well,
Keep
thanks.
just
it
one
going.
last thing I would like people
Yeah.
to understand is that I wrote a paper on the psychopathy of trans use. And I think that's one of my other, as well as the gender dysphoria paper. I really want people to read that paper if they can, because I think we got into this mess because we did not understand who we were dealing with, the nature of the people. And I
Will you
call them
send me?
trans type. Sorry?
Will you send me a link?
Yeah. I call them trans type psychopaths.
Yeah.
And my contention is that we had the gatekeeping from years ago, and you had to go through years and years of therapy to be allowed to transition. And I think anybody can do it now. And I think most of today's modern crop of transvestites pushing this, like the people who mean that I've got to
Yeah,
have a ring
I
doorbell,
agree.
they're
So generally,
psychopaths.
where can people find you?
Just on Twitter, I've been thrown off every other platform. I lasted one day on Medium. I got thrown off Instagram, got thrown off Facebook. So the only place I exist now in the digital realm is on Twitter. And they're forever trying to have a go at me. They're always, trying to report me. I haven't even published my article about brain damage, and they've been reporting me to my regulator and email and whatever. Yeah, I'm on Twitter.
Well,
And the
as we
articles are
said,
all under my profile.
Yes, they
sure.
are. There's
Yeah.
an articles tab in her profile. It's all very good stuff. Dr. Dion Pamela Joseph, better known as Dr. P. Thank you for doing this. We
Thank you.
appreciate it. We're not going to be strangers, okay?
I'm happy to come back anytime.
I appreciate that. Rick, thanks for
Thank
showing
you.
up this early in the morning.
Thank you,
You're
Rich.
And thank
very
you.
welcome.
Thank
Thanks
you, Philip.
everybody else
Bye-bye.
for showing up. We appreciate you
Thank
taking an
you.
hour out of your week to be with us and try and be good.